And hi, everybody. It's really exciting to get to be here today. And just before I kind of dive into asking any questions, I just kind of want to explain a little bit my thoughts about why this webinar is so important. I think we can all, understand and see how the work we do to support survivors is a very specific niche. But, what a lot of Black people in Colorado also know is that being Black in Colorado is its own type of niche. And we're really excited to kind of look at those intersections and, understand how that has impacted the work that both Lisa and Dani have done. This will be very conversational, not prescriptive at all. But again, just how their experiences have helped and hindered the work that they do and vice versa. So both Lisa and Dani, I'd like to start out with my first question, which is, how would each of you personally describe the experience of being Black in Colorado?
Anyone, so do you want anyone to just kind of go ahead and speak, I'm assuming?
Yeah, again, very conversational, of course. Try not to cut each other off, but.
Okay, Dani, I'll go first. So my husband and my family, we moved here in 2012. But prior to that, we were in Germany for 5 years. So military community, it gave me an opportunity to kind of see both worlds. So getting here in Colorado, the climate was the same. And so I'm from the South originally though. So it was definitely a different experience, but I can truly say the last 10 years that we've been here, almost 11 now, I have, really haven't seen any issues that has prevented me from doing the work that I was called here to do. And so I'm grateful for that because I grew up in the South, so that's a different beast in itself. And so I definitely, can say that it's been different but good for me.
Okay, Lisa, if I don't want to interrupt, but if the time is right, I'll go. Hi, everybody. I'm Dani Newsum from Cobalt. The military brought my family, the family I was born into, to Colorado too. My dad was in the Air Force, and we moved here many decades ago. And so for the most part, I've grown up in Denver and raised my family in Denver. As I recall your question, Brandi, you asked what it was like being Black in Colorado. And so I don't know if this is specific to Colorado, but I will say exhausting. It has been incredibly exhausting. The older I got, the more aware I became, the more exhausting it became. And working in white-led organizations, whether it was state government, local government, or nonprofits, has its own kind of exhaustion at times. However, I believe I've been able to, notwithstanding being so darn tired, I believe I've been able to accomplish quite a bit. Got a few scars, to say the very least, but I believe I've been able to do some important things.
Thank you both so much for that. And, I'm relatively new to Colorado, haven't been here quite 2 years yet. But what I found a little bit exhausting, Dani, to use your word, is the finding and or creation of Black community. So could both of you speak to that a little bit about, Black community and what that means to you? I know you're also both in different parts of Colorado, so it might look differently, and how you've either created that or found that. I think that can be a really important part, right? We all hear about self-care, but so much of self-care is community care. And it's really comforting sometimes to be around people who look like you and have shared experiences. So I would love to open the floor up to discussions about finding and creating Black community here.
Thank you. Absolutely. I came here. I have 7 children in total. So I brought up my tribe with me. And so now we have some that are adults and they've moved away. But I think just interacting, and I've done the organization. I founded the organization here in Colorado Springs. This year be 10 years. And so what I found is that those that we serve were coming in, and when they found out about what we're doing, and the community was created, whether it be our church home, we came in. We're from a Christian background, and we came in knowing some of our, I guess I would say, other soldiers and their families that moved here as well. And so we kind of started creating a community ourselves, and then now working in the southeast part of Colorado Springs. That's predominantly where a lot of the African Americans in Colorado Springs, they live and gather as well. So it's just been a big impact, but it was never something like, oh my gosh, there's not a lot of Black people here, because where we found when we came in, they were different, whether it's the faith-based community is kind of how we started gathering. And then as they begin to kind of go out, we did a lot of community service. And so that's how we just created our community.
Wow, that's an interesting question. I'm a former civil rights attorney. I worked at the Colorado Attorney General's office in the Civil Rights and Labor Department. And at the Attorney General's office, I mean, the work is kind of specialized, but I did find a large number for Colorado of African Americans on staff there. But I left the Attorney General's office ages ago and have spent the most of my professional life either in nonprofit advocacy organizations, like where I am now, Cobalt, or local government. And I don't want to keep going on forever, but at Cobalt, I'm the director of strategic partnerships, and I'm getting paid to reach out. And Cobalt is a Colorado-based organization that advocates for comprehensive reproductive health care and comprehensive reproductive rights. And we champion abortion care and abortion rights. And there is a kind of mythology that African Americans are skittish about abortion, about discussing abortion, and so on. And one of the things I set out to do deliberately when I joined Cobalt in my outreach was to reach out to African American, to Black people. And first of all, I found out about the mythology. It was not necessarily true. But in that outreach, I have found that we indeed do have a community. So Brandi, in fact, that's how I met you. But there is, our numbers may not be large, but our passion is deep, and there really is there are communities of African Americans in Colorado that care passionately about reproductive rights. So I just had to bring that into where I have been working of late. And I got to tell you, that's absolutely comforting.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think, again, community care is so important. And I think there are so many ways to find community. And I think that is kind of the beautiful thing. is sometimes you find it on purpose or on accident. Um, and I think that is really core to, filling all of us up as humans is, being able to share our experiences with those we have things in common with. But I'll kind of lead into my next question. And I think, Lisa, you touched on this a bit, but I would love to hear you dive into it. But how does being Black affect your work with those you advocate for? I know that you mentioned like geographically being around other Black people and working with them that way, but I didn't know if you had more to add on to that.
Sure. So I think it's affected in a way as an African American woman growing up in the South and having my husband is also African American male. We took pride in our heritage and we wanted to make sure that our children were aware of the history and where we came from. We are raising our 1-year-old twin boys. They're 7, but they're biracial. We adopted them, so we wanted to make sure we embraced. So that they'll know, exactly what that looked like and how the struggle happened and where we could go from here. And so it just brings me to realize when I started my nonprofit, we actually provide services for everyone. It doesn't matter your skin color or or anything. But what I found is that the connection happened when those that are Black women and men would come in and they see that, because a lot of our staff are African American as well. It was like a sense of, oh my gosh, I didn't know you all were here. And they opened up, so it just kind of meshed, like they were looking for something. Like they would tell us that they would go to other organizations and they felt like they didn't fit in or they didn't get the services they need. And then automatically it was I'm safe now. And it's that safety that we see when we connect with each other, that sense of I'm safe because I know that person looks like me and I can provide that service. And so it's been really passionate and very rewarding and grateful that I'm able to be in that space for others that look like me, to be able to say I finally have an organization that I can go to, that I can get support and not feel ashamed or not feel like I'm not going to get this because they don't understand. So it's been a very rewarding experience. And like I said, we make 10 years in April of this year, and they're just continuing to come and they're finding out, and they really are at a point that they're really ready to heal, because now they have an organization that does the work that they need and provide that support that they can now start working on their trauma.
Cobalt is not a direct provider of reproductive healthcare services. We have advocacy, we have a 501c4, a political arm where we support candidates and support legislation. And we also have an abortion fund with no residency requirements and no income requirements, but we don't directly provide reproductive healthcare services. What I have found is, if before I was talking about being exhausted, I have found energizing and quite comforting being around African Americans who feel, I'll use Lisa's word, safe to discuss reproductive health care, to discuss abortion. So whether it's at a Black-led health fair, whether it's a large health fair, whether it's a small health fair, whether it's a Juneteenth, because we're at all of those, whether it's giving presentations to local, I don't know what that is. Anyway, whether it's giving presentations to the state NAACP or local NAACP or other Black-led organizations, there's a comfort that I feel, and that I think others feel too, where we can talk, not have others talk for us, but we can talk and and share our feelings and our concerns. It's good to feel comfortable and to feel safe, you know, and that takes a lot of work to create that, but nevertheless, it's very rewarding, totally worth it.
I also really picked up on, Lisa, your use of the words safe and safety, and I think that is so important. And although I did say, you know, this isn't a prescriptive conversation, I do have to admit, I think that is a really big piece of, you know, what a lot of agencies could take from this conversation, is that Black people feel safe around other Black people. And that is really important when you are talking about these very personal issues and asking for help and healing, which is already a vulnerable experience. But you spoke to a little bit about the kind of support you get and, you know, you give to other people of all races, but specifically, you know, Black people as well. What support have you needed, you know, in your career as an advocate, whether it was at your current position or at previous positions in the past? Has there been a type of support that you felt you needed and either got or didn't get that may or may not have been related to, you know, Dani, you spoke to like being Black and white-led organizations or something similar?
Yeah, for most of my professional life, I didn't get that support. So there you go. I'm older than you, Brandi. But for most of my professional life, yeah, that support was not available within the organization that I worked in. Since I've been at Cobalt, that has been different. It is a white-led organization, but it's a white-led organization that's pretty intentional about its work on anti-racism and centering anti-Black racism as part of that. So whether it has been internal to the organization or whether as of like now, where we have, we're being guided through it by Black-led anti-racist or, you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion professionals. They've been very intentional. So number one, that's different, but also this is a benefit from the outreach work that I do. I'm doing outreach on behalf of Cobalt, but what I also get, particularly when I am reaching out to Black-led organizations, is going back to what you were talking about, Brandi, creating that sense of community. And it is so therapeutic to be able to just be in the company of people, whether we're talking about reproductive rights or another issue, or whether we are just getting together. We are just getting together. And there's an organization in Colorado, the COVID kind of, well, it blew up so much, but Soul to Soul Sisters that have, you know, Black Love Saturdays. You know, so Black self-care Saturdays. And prior to COVID, we would meet in person. And boy, would that be, oh man, it's just like drinking from you're in a desert and it is a long, cool sip of water. So that has been fabulous. So my outreach work has personal benefits too.
And as far as me, again, prior to coming here, I was in Germany. So there were a lot of other Black people that I was around, and we connected with that. So, and then coming from the South, all of my family, prior to that, all of my family is in South Carolina. So I never had an experience where I didn't have that connection if I needed to have that connection. Some jobs early on, I did find that, I was the only Black woman that was in the organization, but there would always be, I'm coming home to my family. And I'm able to get that need that was lost when I was at work. So so that's been my experience. So I've never had a disconnect where I felt like I didn't have that support if I needed it. That makes sense.
That's amazing, and I'm jealous. Dani, you mentioned not having support you needed in previous positions, and you mentioned it a little bit as well, Lisa. I think it could be helpful if we kind of could speak to specifics of like what support would have been nice that you didn't get. Was it that you were the only Black person or person of color and were expected to speak for all people of color? Was it that, you needed your coworkers to have had some type of experiences with diversity and they just didn't and no one did anything about it? I think, speaking to those specifics can be helpful to the leaders we have in this Zoom room right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think being able to acknowledge the diversity in an organization, if you have those that don't look like you, oftentimes you kind of, it's like a hidden, like a elephant in the room type thing. You know that that person is different than everybody else, but you don't acknowledge that difference or make that person feel welcome. And so what I try to do just in my own nonprofit, I have a couple of white women that's in there. I have someone that's a Latina. And so I recognize that they're different than some of the others. And so we embrace that. And we're not afraid to have those conversations or how it makes them feel comfortable. So everybody feels welcome. Some of the other earlier years of working, I never had that. It was like I was the elephant that was in the room. And it's like, oh yeah, she's different, but I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to just operate as if there's not anything different. And I felt isolated a lot, like I wasn't a part of the group. And so it made it difficult for me because I'm a very personable person and I love everybody. And I like to have that experience where we're all getting along, but it was always that feeling of that it's not being acknowledged, that there's a difference there. So that was kind of my experience, but I made sure that when I started this organization that would never happen.
That's so good to hear, Lisa, about being so intentional in working with the staff members of your organization. And maybe that's the number one thing that I've missed for most of my professional life, that intentionality on the part of the organization. And so without that intentionality, without being ham-fisted and, oh, we know you're Black, and so tell us what we need, not tell us what you need. But that intentionality, that absence of intentionality, and in those organizations, you kind of, at least my experience was that you bore the weight, you bore on your shoulders that you're the only one. You might have been the only one, but the corollary to that is that you're carrying everybody. You're carrying everybody. You're the only one, so you're every Black person. And that's something that's frankly, that's outside of the work world. That's something that I had grown up with, that could have been at school, not elementary school. That was wonderful. But once we moved away from, my dad was transferred away from Lowry Air Force Base when it was an Air Force Base and not a housing development, and where we lived in Park Hill with so many Black people. And I went to Stedman Elementary, but once we moved away from there, it was that the only one, or one of a few syndrome, one of a very few syndrome. And that put a lot of pressure on, I put a lot of pressure on myself. And sometimes others, non-Black people, aggravated that, definitely aggravated that. and you were put in the position of being a spokesperson. It doesn't matter how many times you say you're not a spokesperson, but you're still put in that position, and that's exhausting. Linda Villarosa has a book out called Under the Skin. She is a healthcare reporter, but that weathering, this idea of weathering is how racism in various United States systems and institutions, how it weathers a person, how the toll it takes. And so it was that weathering that was very difficult, and some in the workplace, some intentionality on the part of employers, some awareness and intentionality would have been what I would have welcomed.
Yeah, I think that awareness, intentionality is so helpful. And yeah, like Lisa said, like nobody wants to be the elephant in the room. Like having open conversations without, like you said, being ham-fisted is so important. You also kind of spoke about part of why you joined Cobalt was the intention of anti-racism and anti-Blackness. I would love to speak to you, not necessarily about those topics, but how those show up in nonprofit work. I think we're all lucky in the nonprofit space and in this advocacy space to have lots of learning opportunities, specifically around diversity, equity, and inclusion. But, you know, to give my own spicy take, I know that there are a lot of areas that I could learn more about. But when it specifically comes to, like in diversity issues, but when it specifically comes to anti-Blackness and anti-racism, I'll admit I've had the thought, like, this isn't a me problem. Why do I have to sit through this training, or why do I have to fix it or work on it? So I would love to hear both of you kind of speak to your thoughts on the incorporation of DEI training and whether it puts additional weight on Black employees in this space, or is it good for everyone to be involved in, but specifically that anti-racist, anti-Black training?
I definitely think it's important. It is important because we want to be educated. We may not. Like, I'm a Black woman, and there may be some things that I don't know, and I'm always learning ways to be able to share that with my kiddos at home, and then my grands and anyone that's around me. So yeah, it might be cumbersome because as a Black woman, I might say, I know this. Why do I have to do this? But I can promise you, more oftentimes when you go through these trainings together, then there's a sense of, okay, we're all getting the same information. And then hopefully there's an openness where we can then discuss and share our feelings or have those aha moments that we probably would have never had if it wasn't a situation where we're getting the information. So I think it's important for us all to be able to be a part of that, and then making it just not just like a PowerPoint presentation, but more of an open forum of a round table where they'll be truly able to ask questions and expect, like, okay, I'm gonna be okay with what the answer is because maybe I didn't know that in the first place. Is what I think about those types of things.
I just want to pick up on something Lisa said. On one hand, yes, we've been Black all our lives, and chances are there's not going to be a revelatory moment in the anti-racism sessions. On the other hand, I'm part of an organization. I want to know what they're learning. I want to be privy to that. So as long as the Black and other peoples of color, members of that organization are not looked to, again, as representing everybody and made to be the white attendees, their cultural experience or their cultural teachers. No, that's a problem. And a reputable and professional anti-racism training team would never let that happen. and they would step in. There might be well-meaning people who haven't learned that yet, but they would step in, because that can be, that's a horrible position to be put in. But number one, I really want to know what my coworkers and what board members, what they're hearing, what they're experiencing, and being a part of that. I do.
Well, speaking to that, as well as, creating dialogue, just a quick reminder that if anyone has any questions for our panelists, we will be going over those towards the end of our conversation. So if you want to pop those in the chat now, that would be great as we continue our discussions. But I guess my next question is all about what you hear from the people you work and have worked with about their experiences of being Black in Colorado. Because again, this is the 4th state I've lived in, and it's different everywhere. So I know, Lisa, you spoke to a lot of people you work with saying, oh, I didn't know you were here, and that creation of safety. But is there anything you hear about, that occurs outside of your walls that is cause for concern, or that other people who do similar work in this state need to know about?
Let me think about that, because I'm just kind of thinking back my 10, almost 11 years here. And I can truly say this has been one of the best places that I've lived. It's diverse enough. I haven't had any issues where I haven't been able to get the things that I needed, and the relationships I've built, because I've built a lot of relationships with those who are not Black as well. So I don't know. I don't have any, I can't really say in these last 10 years, I've had any negative experience when it comes to that. Or I've had situations where I've had a couple of guests that come in the doors, and because we were primarily Black people, they felt like if we didn't give them the service that they thought they needed, that they were being discriminated against. So that was something that was new for me. But that's happened probably out of this time about twice already. But they were from 2 women who were white women. So that was just interesting for me.
Hey, Brandi, can you restate your question?
If I can remember it, yes. I think the core of my question is, have you heard about experiences other Black people have had that you think are important to talk about in this wider community that we, again, currently have in this Zoom room, that leaders need to know about? Because again, we have the, honor of being safe spaces for other Black people. So are there any concerns that, have been raised to you that you don't necessarily know that others would feel comfortable sharing in predominantly white spaces, or with, white organizational leaders that you think could be helpful for people to learn about now?
I think that's a really good question. I mean, at this, I'm lucky that at this point in my career, how do I say this? I feel more empowered. I feel more empowered than in earlier times in my career. But looking back over that career, and again, working for white-led organizations and with staffs that were predominantly white. And I'm excluding Cobalt from this because this is it's a very different experience than what I did experience previously. But sometimes I have found that some of the most progressive people, progressive white people, are the ones who are, it's most difficult to make any headway. They may not be open. I found they're not open to listening, to listening to their Black staff, other staff of color. And it could be from something regarding outreach to communities of color, something that's so important. And it was rather top down, and the folks just were not open to listening. And that I found, gosh, so frustrating. So frustrating. And you would think that people who have a liberal or even progressive orientation towards social, political, economic issues, I found could be just the most difficult to make headway with. It's kind of this attitude that we know better than you. And again, that's not what I find at Cobalt at all. It is a breath of fresh air. But in the past, that has been the case, where again, working with progressive organizations, they were the ones who were sometimes most closed to listening to staff, to volunteers, to the community members that they were trying to serve.
Lisa, I saw you, nodding along to some of the comments that Dani just made. And I'm sure, with Kingdom Builders being the Black-led and founded organization that others reach out to, you've had some similar experiences. Would you like to speak to that at all?
Yeah, I definitely, Dani, thank you for your thoughts, because it's definitely, we're in this journey as African American women in positions where there's leadership. There's oftentimes, there's not a lot of us in these leadership positions, so it's kind of hard to find your way, if that makes sense. In certain things, making sure that you're still being true to who you are as a Black female, but then also knowing that there's going to be times where you're in the table where there's others that won't look like you, and how are you being received? Am I getting the right support because of that? But again, on this journey, and I only have great things to say about my experience here in Colorado, and it's probably because of my faith overtakes everything, because I have faith in God, and I know that where I am, regardless of what position I'm put in, I can overcome that. And then I'm 51 now, so I look at things differently than I would if I was in my 20s and my 30s. So that could be another thing as well. But just appreciating my Blackness, and I love who I am. I love the experience that I've had. I love my history, and so I want to share that. But then I also know that my love for God allows me to help everyone and not see a color, but there's always going to be that color factor because of just being a Black woman, and being in a position I'm in. So that's what I have to kind of say on that space.
I love that phrase you just used, Lisa, about appreciating your Blackness. I think before we get into questions to, I don't know, be on a happy, smiley note, I would love to hear how you both consciously appreciate your own Blackness and the Blackness of those around you. I think that's such an important and beautiful thing. I know my favorite thing about my own Blackness is other Black people, specifically making those connections with other Black women. And whether our experiences are similar or very different, there's just kind of an automatic connection that exists that I can't even put words to. It's so invaluable. So I would love to hear about other ways that you're able to, again, appreciate your own Blackness and that of those around you.
I think every day I go home and I see my children and how they have come into this world, and I'm responsible for seeing them see their true beauty. I only have 2 girls, and so it started very young because I wanted to embrace their natural hair, and they would have opportunities sometimes where they would get picked on because of the texture of the hair. So I had to learn early on how to have a tough skin as being a Black woman raising Black girls, because with boys you can cut their hair and you don't have to worry about it, but then when you have female girls, how do I get them to love and appreciate who they are? And I've done a great job. And of course you can see now I've locked mine up now. But I love the fact that, you know, I can make changes or whatever, you know, wherever it has to be, from my hair, from whatever it is. I'm just happy with myself. And every day I make sure that my children are in that space as well. So no matter what situation they go in, I have two sets of twins, actually 2 sets of biracial boys, and they're 7. And then I have my 18-year-old, so it's a boy and a girl. So both are going off to college, separate states, here in this fall. And so that's for those who have children that have gone off to college, you already know how bittersweet that is. And so I have 2, one's going to New York and the other one's going to California. But just knowing that I have raised them to love who they are. And when they go out in the world, then there's no issue of being able to take on the world, no matter what that looks like, and being happy in their own skin and knowing that God created them the way they are, and they don't have to be embarrassed or feel threatened. Now, you know, with the world we live in, we already know some of the things that are going on with the males and also some females just for being Black, but just empowering our children to know that they have to continue to know what right looks like and just walk in their trueness. And I got their back. And so and then also my staff, I have a lot of young coming out of college who are fired up and really excited about the world and just kind of trying to keep their light from being dim, because the world can sometimes dim us because of you know, how we look, if that makes sense. I just, you know, always look at things positively, but never forget where we came from, and always aware of that, but also embracing that this is just who God created us to be.
I love that Lisa talked about her kids, and which made me think about mine. They're adults. I have 2, a son and a daughter. But even to this day, they'll say, you know, Mom, they'll maybe listening to something online, maybe saw something on TV, and they're like, you know, I know that that was BS, or I know that that was true, or whatever, because you made sure we knew. And as a mom, that feels good. You know, trust me, it could have been elementary school, you know, a trip to, in fact, yes, after 9/11, I remember my daughter came home, she was in elementary school, came home with a sheet of, quote, patriotic, close quote, songs that the children would be singing over the course of the next couple of weeks. And I'm just looking over it, and all of a sudden I see Dixie. And I'm like, oh no, oh no, that's not going to work. And so I got her in the car, we went to the school, I talked to the principal, and he said, well, of course your daughter doesn't have to sing that song. I'm like, oh no, you'd misunderstand. Nobody's going to sing that song. That's not a patriotic song. That's a traitor song. And so that's how my kids came up, you know, and now they can advocate for themselves. And my daughter is actually an immigration attorney, but it's like, oh, no. And so teaching everybody about something, in that case, it was about the origins of Dixie. And that's probably the most rewarding for me, truly, having my now adult kids saying, Mom, thank you. Thank you for telling us that Lincoln didn't free the slaves, you know, for boring us maybe with the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment, and the fact that thousands and thousands and thousands of enslaved Black people walked off during the Civil War. That kind of information is so important. It can get you jailed, I guess, in Florida right now, but that kind of factual historical information is important, and it's part of being Black in America, is understanding where we came from, understanding personally where you want to go, but you got to understand where we came from.
Well, thank you both so much. I'm going to turn it over to Sierra to see if we have any questions that came through in the chat. And again, there's still time to type questions and comments if you have them. Again, we just have, again, two amazing women who are been so open about their experiences, which I can not say thank you enough. So thank you both so much. But Sierra, do we have any questions and comments for our panelists?
This is Sierra. Thank you for this robust conversation. Just encourage everyone to check out the conversation that's happening in the chat. A question did come in, and it's sort of along the lines of what you all were chatting about earlier around like intentionality and awareness. And so when you all were having the conversation about your colleagues, right, within your agency or within the work that you were doing, how do you, both of you or either of you, have some tangible examples of how maybe partners or partnerships have been intentional or aware of the work that you all were doing and how they showed up for you or your advocates or staff that you were working with? Just interested to hear relationships outside of your organization, how they maybe have shown up.
Well, I know, so I've worked with CCASA quite a bit in getting training. And so I'm intentional with reaching out to other organizations that don't look like me, just because I want to make sure that I get as much knowledge and support as I can, because I know this journey is a big journey for me. But it's once I get connected, and some of the ladies that's from CCASA that's work with me will probably know, we just kind of work well together because I'm always open to learning new things. And just being we had Jenna, I think she's gone from you all now. I am old school. So when it came up about knowing about the LGBTQIA population, that was far to me because I grew up in the South and we had a certain upbringing that was different, right? But I knew that, you know, God, again, God's love is amazing. So I wanted to find out more. So I asked, can you all bring some training to my organization so you can tell us what are some of the, how do I do the pronouns? How do I do this? Because I want to make sure that I'm doing everything in my power to, as a woman of color, to make sure that we're not further harming any of our guests that are coming through the doors because of something, if they're different from who I am, if that makes sense. So I'm very intentional in that. And when I do that, it opens up a way of, wow, she really wants to learn. And so it becomes an experience where I'm connected with that organization because of my searching for more information. Because knowledge is power. I believe that wholeheartedly. So I'm always trying to find out, what can I learn more? How can I be intentional in making sure that I'm not further harming those that come through my door and also the staff that I serve? Because I'm a server. Even though I'm the CEO, I serve. So I want to be able to make sure that I'm displaying that as well.
I love that, Lisa. I really do, because I mean, obviously we are Black women, but you know, we most of us have some kind of privilege, right? So I'm heterosexual, I'm cisgendered, I'm English speaking, I've got a college degree, a law degree. I mean, you know, and I just love how Lisa was talking about owning her own privilege and reaching out for training, LGBTQI training, so that not only she could be a better person, but that kingdom builders could better serve people. So I just absolutely love that. I just needed to say that. And let's see, getting back to your question about how I think the question, Sierra, was how people have shown up for you or shown up for me? Yeah, you know, that happened fairly recently in a rather large meeting with a lot of organizations and with a lot of organizations. And someone essentially said that this was a white person, that because Colorado's Black population was, well, I guess technically 4% or less, that certain attention was not warranted on that population. I'll just leave it at that. And again, at this point in my career, I'm feeling like really empowered, but it was very interesting to see white attendees at that meeting, you know, go ballistic. So, you know, it's one thing to be empowered, but it's also exhausting, right? You know, if you have to lay out the facts of life for, if I had to lay out the facts of life for that speaker. So it felt good to have other people, you know, with their privilege, take up the responsibility that comes with that privilege. You know, talk to that guy, talk to your guy.
Well, thank you both for that. Again, just encouraging everyone who's in the space with us to either ask questions or share some comments in the chat box for our panelists. Also just wanted to draw attention, just a lot of appreciation for both of you was happening in the chat, for sharing your lived experience, for doing the work. And I think the last comment in the chat, they mentioned, however I can support you, us, our evolving community, please count me in. So I think a question that I have for both of you is, you know, thinking about where, you know, our communities have been, where we want to go, really like thinking about legacy and what that looks like in the future. And so if there are things that, you know, we can share with the people in this space today, like how can everyone in this space help work through, right, our privileges, work through our own bias, dismantling all of the things, right? So are there things that both of you can share about how people in this space can contribute that you may not have already shared so far in the conversation?
I think I mentioned being intentional. We all know what our biases are. We all know what we come short on, but just owning up to that. You know, a lot of times we kind of know what we got going on and we just kind of hide it and as if it's something that I shouldn't be talked about. But if we can just acknowledge that, you know what, I'm messing up. I need to figure out a way to be intentional in making sure that a person that I come across that may be a person of color, they don't feel intimidated or like they're the elephant in the room. Just going up and being honest. You know, we like for honesty. I would love for someone to come up and ask me, you know, can we have a conversation? And this is how I'm feeling. Can you help me? You know, just having those times where you're just sharing with one another, because if that happens, then it allows for a conversation to happen, and it may be even some miscommunication or just like ignorance, not even knowing that they're, you know, just not allowing themselves to get into that space of not knowing, but afraid to ask questions. We're okay with you asking a question if you truly, sincerely want to get the answer. So if you really want the answer, then ask it. If you don't want the answer right now, then kind of wait until you get to that moment where you really want to be true to yourself and finding out. So that's what I would bring to the table.
There we go. Yeah, I I love that. Yeah, I just think, I guess intentionality has been the word for this webinar because we've all been using it so much, but it's so important. And something I think it was Deanne had said about using her whiteness to find inroads through invitation, including with my spiritual community. Absolutely. It's not only to reach out and be open, truly be open, own your privilege and be open to, it could be anybody, and a colleague, somebody you work with, might be somebody you go to church with, whatever the relationship is, you have something to learn and know that. Without tokenizing the person you'd like to learn from. You have to be very careful of that too. They didn't necessarily sign up to be your teacher, but if there's space for that kind of honest discussion, do it. I remember I was this was a work-related situation, and somehow we started talking work-related, not somebody I worked with, but somehow we started talking about churches and social justice, and I mentioned my church and how I became a member because of the church's commitment to social justice. And the woman I was talking to, a white woman, said, "Oh my goodness, I've heard about this church. I'd really like to go, but I don't want to impose myself on someone else's spirituality." And I remember I was with my daughter and we just looked at each other like, what is that? And I asked her to explain. And so she's like, "Well, it's a Black church." And I'm like, whoa. You have to set your whiteness aside, okay? There are white people who go to this church. And thanks for being honest, but there are white people who go to this church. You are welcome to visit that church anytime. So there you go. She was honest. She was honest. And hopefully, I've had foot surgery, and so I'm not really up and around. You can't see that, but my foot and part of my leg is in a cast. But when I go and back to church, hopefully I'll see her there. And that's what I hope. So it doesn't just have to be work. It can be any part of your life. Be open. And when it's your turn, as Deanne said, when it's your turn to, and those opportunities come up frequently, when it's your turn to own your privilege and open somebody else's eyes who need to be open, do it. Do not shrink from that.
Thank you both for that. I'm just writing notes for myself. I love what you just ended with. Don't shrink from that. I think a lot of us need to hear that, right? And rise to the occasion. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat, but feel free to share those. I'm wondering, Lisa and Dani and Brandi even, is there anything that you would like to share that we haven't necessarily asked in question form that you think is really crucial and important to share with everyone today?
I just want to, oh, sorry, Dani. I just want to thank everyone that took the time to come on the webinar. That's, showing us that you are invested in educating yourself on some of the things that we're facing. And so I appreciate that. And I'm sure the other others do as well.
I cannot add anything to that. Showing up is so much part of the work that we all do. So thanks for showing up.
Yeah, and although I can't say whether or not my own questions were good or bad, right? I will say that taking the opportunity to educate yourself is so important, as we've talked about intentionality and, you know, being wary of tokenizing the people of color in your lives. I think taking this opportunity to to learn from a resource that's specifically put out there is really important, whether that's, you know, webinars like this or books and literature. In the age of the internet, I feel like there are very few excuses. So I think that is intentionality, right? Like learning for yourself and accessing resources versus, you know, that one Black person in the grocery store, right? So I think that is really important. So I thank you all for taking that step today.
Thank you for having us. This has been great. Thank you very much.
We did have another question just come in with Brandi bringing up resources. Are there specific resources, Lisa or Dani, that you could suggest for individuals to check out?
That's interesting. I default to books sometimes, but even before, you can do both, but I default to books, and there are so many books, whether it's white fragility, white rage, anti-racism books, but also take a look at who you know. Take a look at who you talk with and what you talk about. That can be sometimes you don't know what you know until you assess what you know and what you don't know. And assess the people around you, whether it's your private life, your family life, your work related life, and see, what do y'all talk about? What don't you all talk about? That can be very enlightening. So kind of doing a self-assessment and inventory. And of course, there are books that can help with that. There are books that can help with that too. God, there is one that I just learned of. And of course, that's not helpful because I don't remember the name of it. Oh, I think it's called Do the Work. I don't remember the name of the author, but I think it's called Do the Work. I wanted to check it out just to see what it's about, but I'm pretty sure it's called Do the Work. And I'm not sure if it's by W. Kamau Bell. He is the commentator. He has a show on CNN on the weekends. What is it called? The Color of America? I don't know, but anyway, it's called Do the Work. And it might be by W. Kamau Bell. So it's not some academic, tome. It's very accessible, and I think could be an interesting place to start, along with the people you know.
Thank you for that, Dani.
Sorry, Sierra.
It
was just a resource I thought of. It is by a white author that I personally know and thus trust is doing the work. But both Dani and Lisa talked about how they chose to raise their children to, empower those children into empowered adults. And Dr. Jen Harvey has a book called Raising White Children, or is it Raising White Kids? One or the other, by Dr. Jen Harvey, about raising anti-racist white kids in a world that is racist. So that is my personal suggestion, if you're looking for a resource, especially if you are taking Dani and Lisa's, words to heart about empowering kids from the very beginning.
Thank you for that. Lisa, was there anything you wanted to share? I'm seeing a lot of great resources in the chat as well.
I can't remember the names of the books that I have at home, but I can definitely, when I get to go home tonight, I'll write them down and then I can send them to whoever. You can send it out to the those who are on here today, because they're really good books that I use. As I mentioned, I have my beautiful children, and my 2 boys are biracial. And so at the beginning, when we first got them at a year, I realized that I had to do more, because they're still going to have that part of them that that's different from us. And I didn't want them to ever have to question or know who their identity was. So I had to do a lot of research early on. But I can definitely share those resources tomorrow when I get back in the office.
Thank you, Lisa. And thank you, everyone. Again, just taking a look in the chat, a lot of resources are being shared, and we can definitely collect all of these resources that were mentioned today and send them in the follow-up email after this webinar. So thank you all for having a really, really honest conversation. Again, just seeing a lot of thank yous in the chat for showing up and being honest and having these real discussions. Everyone is very appreciative of all of you, so thank you so much. I'm not seeing any other questions come in. So I think, now is a good time to sort of end some things, seeing some thank yous in the chat. But before we wrap up, again, is there anything that anyone would like to share before we close out?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all.
Awesome. Just seeing the thank yous in the chat again. And as a reminder, for everyone here, we are going to send a link with a survey. If you all would fill out that survey, we really, really, really value your input. And again, we will be sending a follow-up email to everybody just with, again, our panelist information, the resources that we've shared, the survey link. And again, if there's anything that you all need from us, we would love to help you all and get you connected to our wonderful panelists. So don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you all for spending your time with us. We appreciate all of you. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon and evening. Thank you all so much for being here. Bye, everyone.